All right, guys, so I promised you a video on the foundation paper piecing for this key block. So here I am. I've done the three simplest sections first, B, C, and D, and I left A to do with you. So if you're new to foundation paper piecing, it's a little tricky, but hopefully I can help you through it. I printed this on regular printer paper, so you don't have to have anything fancy. I do like having my fancy stuff, but it's by no means necessary. Now, what can be helpful is to mark which ones need to be which fabric. So I'm gonna underline all the ones on here that I know, because I've looked at the pattern and the drawing, are background fabric, okay? So all these ones are gonna be my gray blue whorls, and all the ones I haven't underlined are gonna be like the gold crypto fabric, okay? So sometimes it really helps to just be able to keep track of where you're supposed to be. Okay, for starters, this is the side we sew on. So we put our fabric on the other side. We start with 1. This is the order in which we add the pieces, okay? And some of them are negotiable, some are not. So unless you're experienced at this, follow the numbers, then you'll be right on. So we start with A1. And if you look through the paper, hold it up to a window, look through it, you can see on the other side. And our number 1 piece is gonna go right side up. Now I need to be able to see all around it to make sure I've got seam allowance everywhere. So the pieces are gonna be quite a bit bigger than what you see on here, okay? There's a reason for that, it's a good reason. And it's simply because seam allowances are a thing. And part of the reason we're doing foundation paper piecing on this block is because it's so tiny and precision is hard. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin that in place. And I'm gonna go to this side and I'm gonna take my favorite tool for foundation paper piecing in the whole world, is an add a quarter ruler, okay? And I'm gonna use it and I'm gonna fold that line between A1 and A2 back on the beveled edge of this add a quarter ruler. It's kind of a pain with the pin there, but it really simplifies it to have the pin holding my fabric in place. And then, so the add a quarter ruler, if you're unfamiliar, it has a beveled edge on this side, which is great for folding back your papers. And then it has this great cutout edge on this side for this next step where we flip it over, we lock it in, and we cut our 1/4 inch seam allowance, okay? And now I know exactly where to place my fabric for A2. Yes, the selvage is on here, but it's gonna get cut off. I just know it's plenty big, okay? And I really would prefer to pin on this side because that's what's gonna be on top when I sew. And then the pin is less in the way. When we sew, you've gotta be precise on the inside. So put your needle in right there and don't go past and finish right there. You're gonna want a shorter stitch if you can. My thread keeps breaking because I'm having one of those days. I keep trying to do this and my thread keeps breaking. So I'm really sorry. I'm struggling today. So we'll rethread the machine. I apologize. Because my spool of thread isn't feeding properly, and so I'm dealing with all these hang-ups, and the really simple solution is to use a different spool of thread, but that requires going downstairs and getting a different spool of thread. So I'm gonna put up with it for right now. Okay, so my needle's gonna go right down in that first corner. I know you guys can't really see it, but it's right in the corner. I'm gonna stitch very carefully to the next corner. It's only like 6 stitches, and then I'm gonna pull it out, okay? And normally I'd use a leader and ender, but given the way my machine's being right now, I'm not going to. So we take our pin out. Now we have these 2 pieces right here, okay? That's A1 and A2. You can finger press this. You can use a seam roller. I'm gonna use my little iron over here just because that is my preference. You have to be careful when you're doing just these short little seams because you've got these bigger pieces, not to let it get too distorted, okay? So just keep an eye and be careful when you do this. So we've done A1 and A2. You'll notice my markings all went away because I used a Frixion pen and an iron. So we're gonna go to A3. A3 is gonna be a background piece, okay? So we're gonna fold it back, right there. Trim off our excess so I know where to line it up. And you can always hold it up to the light or up to a window. I don't like to do foundation paper piecing at night simply because the light's not good. And so it kind of stresses me out and I have a hard time seeing it. So we'll get another background piece right here where we've got it nicely cut. Line it up. I can see that it's going to be plenty to go on all the sides. Pin it. Sew it. And we can repeat that process through each of these keys and the spots that go in between the keys. Once again, starting right at the corner and ending right at that next corner, okay? Then once again, we'll go ahead and open it up. Press it. There is no pressing open in foundation paper piecing because you can't. It just doesn't work that way. So we try it. The bulk gets managed pretty well, but the beauty of it is that you don't really have to worry about the bulk too much because you're working complete precision. So it's pretty simple. Okay, next piece is going to, well, gotta fold it. I'm gonna get ahead of myself and try and go too fast. And you'll notice these pieces that I'm cutting for this are bigger than they need to be. I promise you want it that way because if you try precision foundation paper piecing, you will probably just stress yourself out, okay? I don't, depending on what it is, I don't cut too much ahead of time. And even if it tells me you can do this with 1 1/4 inch strips, I'll cut 1 1/2 inch strips just because it makes me feel better, okay? And that's because I know that there's always shifting as I turn the paper over and I do all of the other steps involved. Things shift and they move. And we'll go ahead and get that one out of there. Back, we're getting to that first long tooth on the key. Guys, I had to include a key block in this project just because of the way Darcy included the music box and stuff in her story. I thought that it needed a real key and I wanted the key to look antique. And so the only way I could figure out how to do that and not have you guys hate me for standard piecing methods was to do it foundation paper piece. So I hope you enjoy the challenge of making this key and don't just totally hate me for making it harder than it needed to be. So I have this strip from cutting out my fabric earlier, and it's coming in really handy right now for this little key. So we'll go ahead and see where it needs to be. I'm looking through the paper, you guys. So if you're wondering what the heck it is, I'm looking through. It's hard to show you from up there, but I'm looking through the paper to see where I'm lined up. All right, once again, I don't do this stuff at night because it's my brain's not as awake and I am sure to mess it up. And I can't see as well. So I really prefer to do it in the daylight when I have good lights inside and natural light coming in from outside and I know I can see. It's being hung up again. There we go. Gonna burn my fingers off with my iron, but that's okay. So it doesn't look a whole lot like what it's going to be just yet. But that's okay, because that's part of this process. That's just how this process works. Is it ends up feeling really abstract and weird shapes, and then it turns into something really pretty cool when you're done. I need another piece of this guy. Just get out my scissors. And make sure I'm gonna cover the key section with that. All right, here we go. This machine needs a really good oiling. It just got painted, and this is my first time really using it, and since it got painted. So we're working out its little fun kinks, which is fun. Okay, and now for our last piece on this little section. I'm kind of excited to be moving on to the next little section. Oh, I did not cut that one as much bigger as I thought I did. Woohoo, that's okay. It's gonna be fine. Last one, I'm gonna pin it because I don't want it to wander. And once again, when you're working with these short little seams, sometimes it can try and wander. So I like to make sure that I have it in place. So far we've just been sewing on this solid line. We haven't gone into the seam allowance, okay? Which is good when you're working on the inside of the block. Now we're going to be getting towards the outside, and so we can start sewing into that seam allowance in the right spots. And I'll show you what I mean. So first we got to trim it, and we're going to put, oh, I did that in the wrong order. See, it was supposed to go A6, A7, A8, A9. That's fine. It's not actually going to be a problem. So we can actually do A7 or A8 interchangeably. I'm going to do this part. This is why we don't want to go past the dots, the corners, you guys, because now I've got to be able to pull it back and trim this, and we need to be in just the right spot, okay? Otherwise, you're going to unpick little stitches here and there all over the place so that you can sew this next piece on. Let's see how long this needs to be. I do quite often like to take my ruler to the piece so that I can cut it just right. But we'll just do fine right here. It's gonna be fine. Now, I am being careful cutting out these fabrics, and I would encourage you to be careful with your leftovers from every month, because you're gonna need it later. I feel like I've said it a million times and in every place I possibly can, but I'm gonna keep telling you, you're gonna need it later. So some of it, there's tons extra, some of it there's not. There's always extra, but there's not necessarily tons of all of it. So don't go starting another project or get way too loosey-goosey on your cutting and just be like, I got plenty. Because you might regret that in the coming months. So this one, we're gonna start on the inside corner. I'm gonna move it back a little bit so I can be right at that corner. And now we're sewing through a decent amount of bulk, but because we've been trimming each of those seams, it's okay. And now we're gonna go past into the seam allowance because, well, we can. which is great, honestly. I always feel so much more secure when I start getting to do those longer ones that go into the seam allowance. So I'm going to press that over here. I'm really sorry you can't see my pressing spot, but it is what it is today. Okay, next up. So we've done 8 and 9. So let's go back and do 7. 7 is this piece right here. So if I cut this chunk, and that looks huge compared to what I know I need, but it's really just better to have extra. It just is, okay? So we'll go ahead and fold this back here. And see, once again, we're gonna go right where all those seams started and ended on the other side. And I pre-trim. Some foundation paper piecing instructors will trim afterwards. I prefer to pre-trim because then I can be far more precise about where I'm putting my fabric. And then I know for sure that I have plenty. Anyway, and I just prefer it that way. You can do it however you like, but I realize I do it differently than the way it's taught by a lot of people, okay? Once again, we're gonna start on that inside corner. Maybe if I can get my thing there. Oh, my bobbin got hung up. There we go. Sorry. I need to grease and oil this girl really well. And we're back on the inside, so we've got to stop at just the right point. Don't keep going. Cut off my little piecey here. And now it starts looking like keys, like what do you call them? The tines on a key, the forks, I don't know what they're called. The teeth, they're called teeth on a key. Okay, so we've done A7, A9. So we can do A10, which is this big longer piece right here. Actually, the last 3 pieces here, the order doesn't matter that much. I would do this one after this one, but other than that, it doesn't really matter all that much. So that's where, yes, follow the instructions as much as you can, especially if you're new to this, okay? But some of them, it's not a big deal, so it's okay. Okay, so we want to pin this pretty good. And then this is going to be the easiest seam of the whole process, because we're just going to go straight across. There we go, loosen it up a bit. And this one we want to go all the way across the seam allowance, okay? And what I will tell you is if you successfully make the A section, you can do B, C, and D without my help. You can refer back to this if you'd like, but if you manage to do this one, you should be good to go. Oh my gosh, that is a little short. I'm gonna make it work, but see, even I cut it a little too close right there. Don't get stingy with fabric. That's the rule. Rule number 1 is don't get stingy with fabric. And I am really stingy with fabric for most things, you guys, but not for this. Okay, it's not worth it. It's too stressful when you run out or when it's not quite big enough. And I promise you'll get plenty of background fabric with month 3. So just don't be stingy with it. You don't need to be. move it that way. And actually, foundation paper piecing can be quite forgiving. Because what I can do potentially is instead of undoing this seam here, I can just stick another piece on of the same background fabric and solve the problem. Okay, and then our last main piece is this other corner. And these triangles don't look that big, but they do need a decent sized chunk of fabric, okay? Because they've got to go out all the way over, okay? So I'm gonna actually take this and just use the whole thing. I'll put it right here. And I don't like to pin on that side, even though it feels like it would be easier, simply because then I have to feed it through my machine on the other side, and it's not always easy to do. So that's why I hang on to it, flip it over. Oh, and I broke my thread. You guys, I'm so sorry. It's been a day. But I swore I was gonna get this video done. And so you're getting an imperfect version of it, but you're getting it. So that's the whole point, right? If you ever use a thread featherweight, you know you have to thread it sideways. So it's kind of weird, kind of feels slightly abnormal, but it works great. And all these extra threads can be trimmed and stuff later. You can clean up your block when we're done. Okay. So that's officially the last piece for this, but I am, because I was being skimpy, gonna go ahead and add a chunk on the other end, just so my block's not a tiny bit too small. Okay, so we'll open this up and press it. And then actually, I don't even really have to pay attention at this part. You could flip it over and do it the right way, but this will be fine. Because what it's gonna give me is enough fabric to cover my entire seam allowance, and that's what I needed, because I messed up. Okay, so this block is not the rectangle. This piece of the block is right now not the rectangle that it needs to be. So we need to trim it. And like I told you before, this is the edge of the block and this is the edge of the seam allowance. So I like to make sure and measure, you guys. I will take my 1/4 inch and put it on this line and focus on it more than I focus on where their drawn trim line is. Because then I know for sure I have a full 1/4 inch of seam allowance to work with. And if you've been doing this very long, you know seam allowance and keeping that accurate is a huge part of success in quilting, is making sure your seam allowance, your seams are accurate. Last cut. Okay, so now we're done with the cutting part. We have this, and this is our block. It's in 4 pieces. Nothing looks like it goes where it goes, right? And that's because we have to assemble it. I do like to leave the papers in as I do this part. Just because I feel like you've got so much stuff on the bias and going at weird angles and everything that if I take the papers out, I lose that structure, and then I feel like it moves around so much more on me. So I leave the paper in for this step. So I'm going to sew that first seam, the B and D pieces together. And now to press that, I'm going to take just the seam allowance part of the paper out because I want to press that open because it's going to be a bulky little sucker. And it's hard to press open with paper in there. And then it's hard to get the paper out. So I'm going to go ahead and take the paper out just from that seam. That little chunk, there we go. And we'll open it up. See, look how nicely that matched right there. And we'll press that open. And at this point, I would say don't finger press. I'd say get an iron. But you do you, boo. But that's my take on the subject. Okay, so we have this piece here. Then we're going to attach that to our C piece. And you might want to pin this one just because it's a little bit bigger. But you'll notice that it matches quite well. And once the seam allowances work out, our points should all match pretty darn well too. Okay? And you know, it'll be close enough. Even if you're new at this and it's scary, it'll be close enough. At bare minimum, it'll look like an abstract key. Then once again, because I'm going to attach it to this part, I'm going to take the paper out of the seam area, just so I can press it better. Now, one of the tricks I normally like for foundation paper piecing, I didn't do it here, is I like a lighter weight thread. I'm using Aurifil 50 weight here, which is what I normally piece with. But quite often for foundation paper piecing, I like the Deco Bob 80 weight polyester thread. It's very strong and very fine. Oh, that was not perfect. Okay, I'm gonna redo this little part. And it's okay if it's not perfect. I just want to be able to show you guys closer. This should be, see how because it shifted over, this is showing. So I'm gonna just take apart half of this seam and redo it. Just because then I will be happier with it. But I'm not going to take out the whole seam, just the half of it. This half. Where it got off. Okay, we're almost there, I promise. Thanks for tolerating how long this is. But it was the best way I could figure out to really show you what the end result was, or the goal was. What we wanted to get here in the end. Okay, so now we're gonna just, actually I'm gonna just take that paper out because there's like nothing left of it. And I'm gonna make sure it's all the way over the edge of this piece because that's where it needs to be. I'm just gonna do it with my fingers. Then hopefully our seam matches up just a tad better than it was. Let's see where we're at. Oh yeah, see, that's better. Much, much better. Cut that thread. That was a really funny way to try and fill in that little corner, but it was the best way I could make it work. All right, I'm gonna press this open again. Once again, because there's so much bulk meeting at those points that it just, I feel better with it pressed open. So now we connect the top of our key to the bottom of our key. And yes, look, that doesn't match. It's not supposed to at this point, because once we lose that 1/4 of an inch on either side, it will. So don't stress if this is how it looks, because it's supposed to. All right, let's meet our ends and pin it. Let's try and do a good job of that. Make sure this end meets right. Then we'll just stitch and we'll be done. And this is where you can just follow the black line to stitch, because that's what we trimmed off of. So we know that it's going to be accurate at that 1/4 inch mark. All right, let's see how it turned out. And there we go. We have a key block. Ta-da! Go ahead and press that, take out your papers, and move on to the next block. Thanks, guys. Thanks for putting up with this, and thanks for joining us on this block of the month. Darcy and I have had a fun time working on putting it together, and I hope you guys have a fun time sewing this crazy little project, and we'll see you later.